everyone, Chris here, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about the books I read between March 30th and April 4th. First up, I read A Whisker of Doubt by Kate Conti, and I gave this book 4 stars. This is the 4th book in the Cat Cafe mystery series. This book is set at Christmas time, and we're back with Maddie, who finds a body in the snow. When a friend is accused of the murder, Maddie can't believe it, and starts to dig in to what really happened. I don't really want to say more about it, as I don't want to spoil the plot of the first 3 books. I'm still really enjoying this series. There were lots of twists and turns in this book that I didn't see coming. I had no idea who the murderer was, and I love when mysteries can leave me guessing until the very end. I'm really looking forward to the next book in this series, and I can definitely see this being one of my favorite series I've read this year, even though we're only in April. Next up, I read Reverie by Ryan LaSala, and I gave this book 2.5 stars. In this book, we're following Kane, who is suffering from memory loss. He knows he was found by the police half dead, but has no idea of the events that led to it. The only clues he is getting is from 3 people who claim to be Kane's friends, even though he has no memory of them being so. Then, when alternate realities start to pop up in front of Kane, he realizes there's more going on than he can even imagine. He must rely on these people who claim to be his friends, as there's a bigger threat in play, someone who wants to alter reality for good. So I found this book to be very confusing. I spent a lot of time not quite sure what was going on. I also didn't find Kane to be particularly likable. I wasn't attached to any of the characters in this book, and I definitely think that made me less invested in trying to grasp what was going on. I think this just needed to have a little bit more detail, and maybe it would have benefited from being multi-perspective, as I think Kane not having a clue also meant that I, as the reader, had no idea what was going on, and I wasn't getting answers fast enough to stay invested in the story. Next up, I read Mary Mary Ghost by Carolyn G. Hart, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. This is the 2nd book in the Bailey Ruth mystery series. In this series, we follow Bailey Ruth, who gets sent to Earth as an emissary of Heaven's Department of Good Intentions. In this story, she is sent to keep an eye on a little boy who's lost all of the family he's ever known. The only family member he has left is a grandmother he's never met, and a friend of his mom leaves him on his grandmother's doorstep without any explanation. He is the only family his grandmother has left as well, though she is surrounded by people she considers family. His grandmother is overjoyed to have him in her life. When his grandmother turns up dead, Bailey Ruth must protect the boy while trying to figure out if somebody murdered his grandmother to prevent her from changing her will to leave a majority of everything she had to him. So at times, I found this book to be a bit slow. It took me a little bit to get into it, but once I was fully invested. I found all of the people that Susan, the boy's grandmother, had surrounded herself with, for the most part, were completely unlikable. And I have no idea why she chose to leave her money to any of them in the first place, though I will say that certainly made them all very suspicious, so I would assume that's why they were so unlikable. I thought it was interesting to see Bailey Ruth try to do better this time, as there is a bunch of rules for how she is supposed to behave when she's on Earth, and she has a really hard time not breaking those rules and almost treats them like guidelines. And because she wants to keep being sent to Earth, she tries really hard in this book to stick to those rules, as she knows it will increase her chances of being sent to Earth on a 3rd mission. Of course, at the end of the day, for Bailey Ruth, the most important thing is protecting the little boy and making sure that no harm comes to him. So she will break whatever rules she has to do so. I did like the Christmas vibes in this book. I have no idea why I read 2 books centered around Christmas at the end of March, beginning of April, but I did, and I did like the Christmas vibes in this book. I'm still into the series, even though it may not be my favorite, and I will definitely be continuing on with it. The next 2 I'm going to group together as they're part of the same series, and they are Amelia Fang and the Unicorns of Glitteropolis, and Amelia Fang and the Memory Thief, both by Laura Ellen Anderson, and both got 5 stars. These are the 2nd and 3rd books in the Amelia Fang series. This is a super cute middle grade series where we follow Amelia Fang, who is a vampire, and some of her friends. In the first book, Amelia's parents are throwing a ball, and Amelia has no desire to go, as she'd rather be out playing with her friends. One of the guests is the king's son, and Amelia takes an instant dislike to him. This only gets worse when he steals her pet pumpkin Squashy, which leads to Amelia and her friends hatching a plan to get Squashy back. These two books follow on from the events in the first book, so I can't really say anything about the plot of either of these books without spoiling events that happen in the first book. I really, really love this series. I think Amelia is such a fun character. These are such fun, easy, light reads, but still really enjoyable. I like the art that's in them. Again, I would show you, but I don't want to risk spoiling anything for book one for you, but the art is really fun and really adds to the book. I will definitely at some point be getting these for some of the youngins in my life when they hit the right age to read them, because they're just such an amazing series, and I cannot wait to continue on with this series and get to read more of Amelia and her friends' adventures. Next up, I read The Curvy Tree by Chris Colfer, and I gave this book 5 stars. This is a companion novel to Chris Colfer's The Land of Stories series. This story specifically is mentioned by one of the characters in the series, and Chris ended up actually writing the story out for us to see it. It is a children's picture book. And has some really nice illustrations in it. In this book, we follow a little girl who feels like she doesn't fit in, and she ends up running off into the forest and coming across a curvy tree who ends up chatting with her. And they end up bonding. This is just such a cute book. I really, really enjoyed it, and it can definitely be read without having read The Land of Stories. You don't need to have read any of the books in that series to read this book. It is completely separate. Like I said, it's just a story that is mentioned by one of the characters in the series. It's just a really sweet novel about this little girl who doesn't fit in and ends up having a conversation with this curvy tree who also doesn't fit in, and they kind of bond over that. It also has gorgeous illustrations, and I just really enjoyed it and thought it was a great little companion to the series, and it's especially interesting when you know how this book is mentioned in the series. So like I said, while you can read it without having read the series, it is interesting to have read it when you know the role it plays in the series as well. Next up, I read Flunked by Jen Kalanita, and I gave this book 3.75 stars. This is a bit of a fairy tale retelling. In this book, we follow Jilly, who is the daughter of a shoemaker, and she and her family live in a shoe. Hard times have befallen Jilly's family, so she goes out and steals to help them keep food on the table. But when she is caught one too many times, she is sent to the Fairy Tale Reform School. This school is run by former villains, such as the Big Bad Wolf, Cinderella's wicked stepmother, and the Evil Queen from Snow White. These villains have turned over a new leaf and are helping the young generation mend their ways before they too grow up to be villains. As she settles in, Jilly begins to realize that things aren't what they seem and wonders if the villains have really changed their ways like they claim to. So this book started off a bit slow. It took me a little bit to get into it, as I was frustrated that the adults surrounding Jilly didn't understand where she was coming from. Jilly wasn't taking things from anybody who couldn't afford to have those things go missing. It's not like she was robbing from somebody else who would really suffer from having these things stolen, and she was only doing it because she really cared about her family and was worried that her siblings wouldn't have enough to eat. And so that made me really sympathize with her reasoning behind it. And while stealing is still wrong, I wish that the adults had been maybe a little bit more understanding of her reasoning as to why she did it. And so it took me a little bit to get in the book because I sympathized with Jilly so much. Once the plot at the school got going, though, I got really into things and was as suspicious as Jilly was, and I really liked getting to see her journey throughout the story. I feel that Jilly really grew as a character throughout the book, and I'm very curious to see where things go next based on the events and the way that this book ended. So I will definitely be continuing on with this series. And lastly, I read The Merchant of Death by DJ McHale, and I gave this book 4 stars. This is the first book in the Pendragon series. In this book, we follow Bobby Pendragon, whose Uncle Press shows up one day and asks him for help. Bobby agrees, but he never expected his Uncle Press to whisk him away to another land. Things are dangerous in this new land, as the land is on the verge of war, as his Uncle Press brought him here to prevent things. If things go wrong, This war could lead not only to the destruction of the land they're in, but could also mean bad things for Bobby's home. So this is a reread for me. I read this a really, really long time ago, and I remember really liking it. And I don't remember how far I got in the series, but I knew there were at least 3 companion books that went with the series, because there's 10 books in the series, and then there are 3 companion novels as far as I know. And I know I never read the 3 companion novels, but I can't remember if I finished the series. And I decided that this year I wanted to do a whole reread of the series and make sure I had read everything. But it had been so long since I read the first book that I knew I was going to have to go back and start at the beginning. I still really enjoyed this book on a reread. I love the fact that the way the story is told, we get to see things from Bobby's point of view, but we also get to see how things are progressing back on Earth, on Bobby's home, because he sends his journals back to his friend Mark. And that is how we're hearing Bobby's story. He's essentially writing his story down in a journal and sending his story back to his friend Mark. And it is interesting to see Mark dealing with what's going on with Bobby and how that is affecting his own world and his own view of the world. And I think that has an interesting little twist, because I think it adds perspective as we're getting to see Mark trying to deal with all of this information that Bobby has dumped on him, the same way we, the reader, are dealing with the information that Bobby is coming across. I also think it gives us another way to learn about Bobby and his character, as obviously Mark has a different view of Bobby than Bobby has of himself. I'd forgotten how fast-paced these novels are, as once Bobby gets to Denderon, there is no slowing down. He is really thrown into the deep end and has to sink or swim. And that made me super engaged in the book. I am really looking forward to reading the next book in the series, as, again, I have vague memories of the next book, which are a little bit fresher now that I've read the first book, but I still know I don't remember the finer details, and so I'm looking forward to rediscovering the second book all over again. So these are some of the books I've read recently. Have you read any of these books? If so, feel free to talk to me about them in the comments below. If you've made it this far in the video, leave me a wrench emoji, like this video, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!